In 5.4.2, we need to be able to explain that there is biochemical evidence. The biochemical evidence we're going to look at is both DNA and amino acids, our proteins, right? The amino acids, which are building blocks for proteins. And these things, because DNA is universal and protein structure is more or less the same, and we'll talk about this, how this DNA makes the same proteins in all living organisms, we can identify common ancestry between living organisms. So before we start talking about the evidence, let's talk a little bit about common ancestry. So let's say you have species A and species B, and you can imagine them to be whatever you want. And in the not too distant past, or maybe the distant past, depending on how long ago, there was a common ancestor between species A and species B before they divided into two separate species. If we wanted to use human evolution as an example, you have Homo sapien, which we are today, and also our closest relative is, well, one of our closest relatives is the Neanderthalensis. There was a common ancestor between those two. What that is, we don't know yet, but there was a common ancestor. And we can continue to go back in time and identify common ancestors and continue to go back in time and further back in time to find like even a more distant link. And we can go all the way back. I mean, this is saying that we can go all the way back to the beginning of time to find what was that one living thing on this planet, the original living organism on this planet that everything evolved from. All living creatures, whether it's a bacteria, a plant, or a people, we all evolved from that. So that's what this common ancestry means, and we can use biochemical evidence to identify that. The first one is the genetic code is universal, nearly universal. There's been some exceptions, but for the most part, it's universal. And that simply means that every codon makes the same amino acid in all living organisms, right? So the same three letters that are going to make arginine are going to make arginine in bananas and baboons and people. The other piece of evidence is that we all use the same 20 amino acids. There's more than 20. There's more than 20 amino acids that exist on this planet, but the ones that living organisms use and have the genetic code for, we only use those 20 to build our different proteins that we use to survive, whether it's making insulin or hemoglobin or a protein that you find on your mitochondria for cell respiration. Piece of evidence number 3 is this idea of left-handed and right-handed amino acids. So amino acids can exist in two different forms. They call them right-handed or left-handed. So if you remember, when our structure for amino acid is a central carbon, hydrogen, we have an amine group and a carboxyl group, and then you have your R group. If the carboxyl group, right, is back, if we're looking at it this way, right, backwards, kind of think of this as three-dimensional, and on the right-hand side of our picture, then the R group sticks out in the front. Also, if it's a right-handed amino acid, that carboxyl group, if it's on the left side in our picture and sticking towards the back, the R group is sticking out towards us. So these are two different orientations that the amino acids can have, and every living thing uses this orientation right here. And if that's the case, if every living thing on this planet decided to use this, it makes us think that, at least hypothesize, that this idea or this method for building proteins using this amino acid and not this arose or came from one common ancestor. The next piece of evidence uh, is something how we can look at certain proteins that have been used and not changed too much or used for the same purpose. And the greatest example is cytochrome C. It's used for the same thing, whether you're a bacteria or a plant or even a human. So cytochrome C is used in this thing called the electron transport chain. We will electron transport chain, which we will talk about later. But this is in cell respiration and making ATP. Now, yes, it's slightly different as you look at different species, but it's used for the same thing. And because this protein is used for the same thing, we think that it didn't just evolve independently and by random chances, that it all looks more or less the same and it does the same thing, but rather it came from a common ancestor a long time ago. So, those are the four pieces of biochemical evidence that make us believe that we can use these pieces of evidence to identify that we all evolved from a common ancestor. So it's the universality of our DNA, that they all make the same thing. The fact that we all use 20 amino acids and not more or less, we use those same ones to build our proteins. We decided somehow a long time ago to use left-handed amino acids. And lastly, we can see how proteins are conserved across many species over a long time.